Hey guys, in today's video, we'll embark on a breathtaking journey with the story of Harlan Winslow, a man who literally came back from the brink of death with an urgent message for all humanity. After a horrific motorcycle accident in the Ozark Mountains, Harlan was taken beyond the limits of our understanding, where he received shocking revelations from God about the future. What he discovered about the end of October will leave you in shock. So before we start, leave your like, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any content like this, and activate the bell to receive all notifications. Now, get ready for this intense and surprising experience. My name is Harlan Winslow, and today I feel compelled to share an experience that completely changed the course of my life. It all started in 2008, during a motorcycle ride in the Ozark Mountains in Branson, Missouri. What should have been a peaceful and invigorating trip turned into an event that took me to death's door and, consequently, altered my perception of life, faith, and the world around us. As I ride my motorcycle through the winding roads of this region, I vividly remember that fateful day. The wind in your face, the roar of the engine, and the feeling of freedom that only a motorcycle trip can provide. Little did I know that in a matter of seconds, my life would change forever. It's hard to believe it's been 16 years since that accident. But the memories and lessons I learned remain as fresh in my mind as if they happened yesterday. Today, I share my story not just as an account of survival, but as a testimony to the profound spiritual revelations I have experienced. My near-death journey took me to places beyond human understanding, made me question everything I thought I knew about faith and religion, and gifted me with a new perspective on the purpose of life. As I prepare to share the details of this transformative experience, I ask that you, dear listener, open your heart and your mind. What I'm about to share may challenge your beliefs, but I hope it also inspires reflection and, perhaps, a new understanding of the nature of our existence. On that fateful day in 2008, I was enjoying a beautiful summer afternoon in the Ozark Mountains. The sky was crystal blue, and fresh mountain air filled my lungs as I rode my motorcycle along the winding roads. It was one of those perfect days for a walk, and I felt completely in tune with my machine and the nature around me. I was rounding a sharp curve at about 30 miles per hour, a speed I considered safe for that stretch of road. The sun shone brightly, creating dancing shadows across the trees that lined the road. It was then that everything changed in the blink of an eye. Suddenly, a truck appeared in front of me, coming from the opposite direction. The driver seemed to have lost control for a moment, perhaps surprised by the curve as much as I was. He swerved sharply to avoid a head-on collision with me. However, this sudden maneuver had disastrous consequences. The back of the truck was loaded with bales of hay, and with the sudden movement, several of these bales came loose and fell onto the road, right in front of me. Everything happened so quickly that I barely had time to react. My motorcycle collided violently with one of the bales, and in an instant, I completely lost control. The impact threw me off the road like I was a rag doll. My body was thrown through the air, and I felt a sensation of free fall for a moment that felt like an eternity. Then came the first impact. I hit a tree with tremendous force. The pain was instant and overwhelming, as if every bone in my body was being crushed simultaneously. But the nightmare didn't end there. The impact against the tree ricocheted me, and my body continued its violent trajectory. I was thrown another 25 meters, rolling and crashing into the rocky ground and vegetation. Each impact brought a new wave of indescribable pain. When I finally stopped, I was lying down a steep embankment out of sight of the road. The pain was unbearable, so intense that I could barely breathe. I knew at that moment that I was on the verge of death. My body was broken, and I could taste the metallic taste of blood in my mouth. I tried to move, but it was impossible. Every attempt to move any part of my body resulted in unbearable agony. I was completely immobilized, trapped in my own injured body, unable to even scream for help. Fear started to take over me. There, alone and seriously injured, I began to realize that I could die in that ravine, far from everything and everyone I loved. The reality of my mortality had never been so clear and frightening. As I struggled to maintain consciousness, My mind wavered between moments of absolute clarity and total confusion. Memories of my life flashed before my eyes like a movie at high speed. Faces of loved ones, moments of joy and sadness, missed opportunities and unfulfilled dreams. Everything seemed to converge at that critical moment. It was in this state of despair and pain that something extraordinary happened, something that would forever change my understanding of life and death. As I lay there, motionless and in agony, something inexplicable happened. In the midst of my pain and confusion, I became aware of a presence beside me. Initially, I thought it might be someone who had witnessed the accident and come to my rescue. But when I managed to focus my eyes, I saw something that defied all logic. Next to me was an elderly woman. She appeared so suddenly and silently that she seemed to have appeared out of thin air. Her face was gentle and serene, framed by snow-white hair. He wore dark-rimmed glasses that reminded me of the ones my grandmother used to wear. Her dress was clearly of a 60s style, with a soft floral pattern and pastel colors. The most surprising thing was that despite the chaotic situation, me bloody and broken at the bottom of a ravine, she seemed completely calm and unfazed. His eyes, behind his glasses, conveyed deep compassion and understanding. She didn't say a single word, it wasn't necessary. His mere presence brought with it a wave of peace I had never experienced. It was as if all the pain, all the fear, and all the anguish I was feeling were absorbed by her. In its place, I felt an inexplicable calm spreading through my wounded body. I tried to speak, ask who she was, or ask for help, but I found I couldn't make a sound. Still, I didn't feel panic. Her presence was so comforting that all my worries seemed to diminish in importance. As she stood there, I felt as if time had stopped. The pain was still there, but it felt distant, as if it belonged to someone else. My once panicked mind was now strangely clear and calm. I don't know how long we stayed like that, me lying on the floor and her next to me in silence. It could have been seconds or hours. At that moment, time lost all meaning. Then, as suddenly as she appeared, she was gone. In the blink of an eye, his figure completely disappeared. It was at that moment that I heard, in the distance, the sirens of rescue teams approaching. It was as if she had accomplished her mission of comforting me and was now leaving, knowing that human help was on the way. The sense of peace she left behind stayed with me, even when the reality of my situation set in again. As the paramedics found me and began rescue procedures, I could still feel the echo of that reassuring presence. At that moment, I didn't know who that lady was or why she had appeared to me, but I was sure of one thing. His presence was not a hallucination caused by pain or shock. It was real as the accident that almost took my life. And this certainty gave me strength to face what came next. The hours and days following the accident are a confusing mix of pain, medications, and medical procedures. When I finally regained consciousness more clearly, I was in a hospital bed, surrounded by machines and tubes. The constant sound of heart monitors and the distinctive smell of antiseptic constantly reminded me of where I was and what had happened. The doctors informed me of the extent of my injuries, and the list was frightening. I had suffered multiple fractures, both arms, both legs, several ribs, my collarbone, and serious spinal injuries. The internal bleeding was severe. I had lost about 4 liters of blood, almost the entire blood volume of an adult. It was a miracle that I survived the journey to the hospital. The first few weeks were a whirlwind of surgeries. I spent more time in the operating room than in my room. Each procedure was a battle to repair the damage caused by the accident. Surgeons worked tirelessly to rebuild my broken bones, stop bleeding, and prevent permanent damage to my internal organs. Pain was a constant companion. Even with strong painkillers, I felt like every inch of my body was on fire. There were times when the pain was so intense that I wished I just wouldn't wake up. The line between life and death seemed incredibly thin, and I often wondered if I had the strength to keep fighting. The doctors and nurses were incredibly dedicated, but I could see the worry in their eyes. My situation was critical, and there were several moments when they feared I would not survive the night. Every morning I woke up was seen as a small victory. The weakness was overwhelming. Losing so much blood had left my body in a state of deep exhaustion. Even the simplest tasks, like lifting your head or moving a finger, seemed to require Herculean effort. I felt completely powerless, trapped in a body that barely responded to my commands. On the rare occasions when I was awake and lucid, my mind wandered to the experience at the crash site. The memory of the elderly woman and the peace I felt in her presence were like a beacon of hope amidst the sea of pain and despair. I clung to that memory, using it as an anchor to keep my sanity in the hardest times. My family's visits were brief and emotional. I could see the fear and sadness in his eyes, mixed with fragile hope. They tried to be strong for me, but I knew they were just as scared as I was. Seeing the impact my condition had on them was almost as painful as the physical injuries. As the days turned into weeks, my condition slowly began to stabilize. Doctors talked about progress, but for me, every small improvement was accompanied by new challenges. The prospect of a long and arduous recovery was beginning to emerge, and I wondered if I would ever be the same again. It was during this period in the hospital, floating between consciousness and unconsciousness, between hope and despair, that I began to have experiences that went beyond the physical world. Visions and sensations that defied medical explanation began to manifest, causing me to question everything I thought I knew about life and death. During the most critical moments of my hospitalization, I began to experience something that went beyond conventional medical understanding. These were episodes that oscillated between dreams and reality, but with a vividness and clarity that made me question whether they were really just medication-induced hallucinations. With my eyes open, lying in that hospital bed, I began to see things that no one else seemed to notice. They were beings, or perhaps it would be more appropriate to call them souls, that seemed to move freely around the hospital room. Some of these entities emanated an aura of peace and tranquility. They seemed to be there to comfort, to offer a comforting presence in the midst of physical suffering. Others, however, were different. There were dark, disturbing figures that seemed lost or trapped in some kind of torment. These visions caused me deep discomfort, not so much out of fear, as out of an overwhelming sense of pity and compassion. It was as if I could feel the weight of her suffering, her confusion, and her despair. Most extraordinary was the feeling that I was seeing beyond the veil that separates our physical world from something else. It was as if, somehow, my proximity to death had opened a window into a reality that is normally hidden from our eyes. I felt like a privileged observer, witnessing something that defied all logic and reason. At certain moments, I had the distinct impression that I could leave my body. It was a strange sensation, as if I could float above the bed, looking down on my own injured body. In those moments, the pain completely disappeared, replaced by a feeling of lightness and freedom that I had never experienced before. During these out-of-body experiences, I could see the doctors and nurses coming in and out of the room, talking to each other, checking monitors, and adjusting equipment. The most surprising thing was that sometimes I could hear their conversations, even when they were in the hallway, far from my normal hearing range. It was as if my senses had expanded, transcending the physical limitations of my damaged body. There were times when these experiences took me beyond the confines of the hospital. I found myself traveling through tunnels of light, arriving at places of indescribable beauty, ethereal landscapes with vibrant colors I had never seen before, stretched out before me. The feeling of peace and unconditional love that permeated these spaces was overwhelming. However, not all visions were pleasant. On a few occasions, I found myself in dark, oppressive places, empty, cold spaces where suffering and regret seemed to be the only realities. In these moments, I felt a deep sadness, not just for myself, but for all the souls who seemed to be trapped in these states of torment. The most intriguing thing was that during these experiences, I had the feeling of being connected to a source of universal knowledge. Information and understanding that went beyond my education or life experience seemed to flow through me. It was as if, for a brief moment, I had access to cosmic wisdom, to answers to fundamental questions about existence and the purpose of life. When these experiences ended, and I returned to normal consciousness in my hospital bed, I was left with a sense of loss. It was like being ripped from a state of perfect understanding and clarity and thrown back into the confusion and limitation of the physical world. The transition was often abrupt and disorienting. Doctors and nurses, when I tried to describe these experiences, often attributed them to the effects of the strong medications or the extreme stress my body was going through. But to me, these explanations seemed inadequate. The vividness, coherence, and profound impact of these visions went far beyond simple hallucinations or feverish delusions. As my physical condition slowly began to improve, these experiences became less frequent. However, the impact they had on me was lasting. They planted in me a seed of curiosity and spiritual quest that would continue to grow in the years to come. Looking back now, I realized that these near-death experiences were a turning point in my life. They not only gave me the strength to continue fighting for my physical recovery, but they also opened my eyes to a broader reality, a dimension of existence that I had never considered before. What I saw and felt during those moments between life and death became the basis for profound personal and spiritual transformation. It was only after 6 long months of recovery that the identity of the mysterious elderly lady who appeared to me at the scene of the accident finally revealed itself. The memory came like a bolt of clarity on an ordinary morning, as I sat in my wheelchair, looking out the rehabilitation center window. In that moment, as if a veil had been lifted from my mind, I knew exactly who she was. The lady with white hair and dark-rimmed glasses was not a stranger or an anonymous angel, but rather my old Good News Bible Club teacher, way back in 1966, when I was just a 10-year-old boy. The realization hit me with overwhelming force. I vividly remembered Sunday classes, the smell of old books and crayons in the small church room. Mrs. Thompson, as I now remembered his name to be, always had a kind smile and words of encouragement for each child. But what made this revelation even more extraordinary was the fact that Mrs. Thompson had passed away years before my accident. I vaguely remembered hearing about his passing when I was in high school, probably in the late 70s. The certainty that it was she who had appeared to me at that critical moment was unshakable. Every detail of her appearance, her hairstyle, her glasses, even the style of dress she wore, perfectly matched my childhood memories. This revelation brought with it a wave of conflicting emotions. On the one hand, there was a deep comfort in knowing that this comforting presence was not a stranger, but someone who had played a significant role in my early spiritual formation. On the other hand, the realization that I had been visited by the spirit of someone who had already departed this world years before was, to say the least, disconcerting. I began to reflect on the meaning of this visit. Why Mrs. Thompson? Why had she been sent to comfort me in my time of dire need? I remembered his lessons about faith, hope, and God's unconditional love. Was his presence at that critical moment a tangible manifestation of these teachings? The certainty that it had not been a hallucination or a trick of my injured mind grew even more. The peace I felt with her presence, the strength she gave me to continue fighting for life, all of this took on a new meaning. It was as if she had been sent as a guardian angel, a tangible connection between this world and the next. In the days following this revelation, I spent a lot of time reflecting on my childhood, on the lessons I learned in Bible Club, and on how those teachings had shaped my life, even if unconsciously. The figure of Mrs. Thompson, who had long been relegated to a forgotten corner of my memory, now became central to my spiritual journey. I tried to share this revelation with my family and some close friends, but I found it difficult for them to fully understand the meaning of what I had experienced. For many, it was easier to chalk it all up to coincidence or a trick of memory. But I knew, deep in my heart, that what had happened was real and deeply meaningful. This revelation became a turning point in my recovery. The certainty that there was something beyond this life, that there were benevolent forces working on our behalf, even in the darkest moments, gave me a new perspective and renewed strength to face the challenges of rehabilitation. The memory of Mrs. Thompson and her appearance at the time of my accident became a beacon of hope, a spiritual anchor that I could cling to in moments of doubt or despair. His presence, and however brief, had planted a seed of renewed faith, a faith that went beyond the limits of organized religion and touched something deeper and more universal. As I continued my journey of physical recovery and spiritual exploration, the memory of that elderly woman, now identified as my beloved childhood teacher, remained a constant reminder that there is more to life and death than meets the eye or our imagination. Minds can understand. As my recovery progressed, the spiritual experiences I had during my most critical moments in the hospital did not diminish. On the contrary, they seemed to intensify and gain even greater clarity. It was as if the veil between the worlds, which had been temporarily lifted during my near-death experience, was now becoming increasingly thin. During this time, I had several experiences that I can only describe as out-of-body trips. In those moments, I felt completely disconnected from the physical limitations that still tied me to the hospital bed or wheelchair. It was a feeling of indescribable freedom, as if my consciousness could expand beyond the confines of my wounded body. On these spiritual journeys, I was taken to places of transcendental beauty. Ethereal landscapes stretched out before me, with colors so vibrant and pure that they seemed to emanate their own light. Fields of flowers that pulsed with life, majestic mountains that seemed to touch infinity, and oceans of cosmic energy that rippled in mesmerizing patterns. These realms seemed to exist beyond time and space as we know them, but not all visions were of beauty and light. In some of these experiences, I found myself in dark and disturbing places. One such place that stuck in my memory was a vast black space, almost like a cosmic vacuum. Within that void, there was what I can only describe as a huge black cube. Within this cube, I could feel, rather than see, the presence of countless souls. They seemed to be trapped, suffering in silence, as if they were serving some kind of cosmic sentence. The sight of these imprisoned spirits filled me with a deep and overwhelming sadness. I could feel her torment, her anguish, her regret. It was as if they were stuck in a state of limbo, unable to move forward on their spiritual journey. This experience made me deeply question our notions of heaven and hell, of reward and punishment after death. During these visions, I often found myself in the presence of beings of light. These entities, which I cannot describe in human terms, appeared to be guides or messengers. They did not speak with words, but communicated directly with my consciousness, transmitting knowledge and truths that went beyond human understanding. It was during one of these meetings that I received a revelation that shook me deeply. The light beings showed me visions of the near future, specifically about events that would occur at the end of October this year. I saw images of natural disasters on an unprecedented scale, devastating earthquakes, massive volcanic eruptions, tsunamis swallowing entire coastal cities. I understood that the recent hurricane that had hit the east coast of the United States was just the beginning of a series of catastrophes that would test humanity like never before. The beings of light made me understand that these events were not punishments, but rather part of a larger process of planetary transformation. It was as if the Earth itself was undergoing a process of purification and rebirth. These visions left me with a sense of urgency and responsibility. I knew I had been chosen to receive these messages for a reason. I felt it was my duty to share these revelations, to prepare people not only for the physical challenges that would come, but also for the spiritual transformation that would accompany these events. As these experiences accumulated, I began to notice profound changes in myself. My perception of the world around me has become more acute. Sometimes I could feel the emotions of those around me as if they were my own. I developed a sensitivity to energies that previously went unnoticed. These new skills, although sometimes overwhelming, have given me a new perspective on the interconnectedness of all things. I began to see the world not as a collection of separate individuals and events, but as a complex web of energy and consciousness, where every action and thought had repercussions that extended far beyond the immediately visible. The visions and revelations I experienced during this period of recovery not only transformed my understanding of the spiritual world, but also gave me a new purpose. I knew I had survived my accident for a reason. Now, my mission was to share what I had learned, help others prepare for the changes that were coming, and offer a perspective of hope and transformation amid the challenges that the future held. As my journey of physical recovery and spiritual exploration progressed, I found myself immersed in deep reflection about religion and spirituality. The experiences I had during my near-death and subsequent visions had fundamentally shaken my understanding of the divine and my relationship with it. Before the accident, I considered myself a religious person in the traditional sense. I attended church regularly, participated in Bible study groups, and followed the precepts of my faith as best I could. My belief was solid, but I now realize it was also limited, confined within the parameters of a single religious tradition. After my transcendental experiences, I began to see the limitations of organized religions in a way I had never considered before. Not that I lost my faith. On the contrary, it became stronger than ever. But now I understood that true spirituality, the genuine connection with the divine, was something much broader and deeper than any doctrine or institution could encompass. I realized that churches, temples, and mosques, with their hierarchical structures and rigid dogmas, often ended up limiting spiritual experience rather than facilitating it. The truths I had glimpsed during my visions went far beyond any specific sacred text or religious teaching. They spoke of a universal reality, of a cosmic connection that transcended the boundaries of creed, culture, or nationality. This does not mean that I have completely rejected my religious background. On the contrary, I began to see the teachings of my childhood in a new light. The parables and stories that I had previously interpreted literally now took on new levels of metaphorical and spiritual meaning. I began to understand that many different religious traditions were actually pointing to the same universal truths, just using different language and symbols. One of the most profound revelations I had was about the personal nature of spiritual experience. I realized that the true connection with the divine was something intimate and individual. It was not something that could be mediated by a priest or prescribed by an institution. It was a journey that each person needed to undertake for themselves. I began to see organized religions not as the final destination of the spiritual quest, but as starting points, as maps that could guide us at the beginning of the journey. But just as a map is not the territory, I realized that religious doctrines were not the experience itself, but merely imperfect representations of a much broader and more complex reality. This new understanding led me to adopt a more eclectic and inclusive approach to spirituality. I began to explore other religious and philosophical traditions, finding beauty and wisdom in places I previously would have ignored or even condemned. Practices like meditation, which I previously viewed with skepticism, have now become an integral part of my spiritual life. At the same time, I developed a new appreciation for the importance of symbolism and ritual in spiritual life. Although I now saw these elements as tools to facilitate spiritual experience, rather than as ends in themselves, I recognized their power to connect us with something greater than ourselves. The difference was that now I could appreciate these aspects without being bound by literal or dogmatic interpretations. One of the most significant changes in my religious perspective was my understanding of the nature of God. The entity I experienced during my visions did not fit any traditional definition of divinity. It was not an anthropomorphic being sitting on a celestial throne, but an omnipresent presence, a universal consciousness that permeated all existence. This understanding led me to see the divine not as something external to us, but as something of which we are an integral part. This new vision had a profound impact on my ethics and morality. The concept of sin as a transgression against an external God has lost its meaning. In its place, I developed a more holistic understanding of ethics, based on the interconnectedness of all things. I began to see our actions not in terms of obedience to externally imposed rules, but in terms of their consequences for the whole of which we are a part. My attitude towards other religions and beliefs has also changed drastically. Where before I might have seen differences and conflicts, I now saw different expressions of the same universal quest. I developed a deep respect for all spiritual traditions, seeing them as different facets of the same truth. However, this new perspective was not without challenges. Many of my former church companions had difficulty understanding or accepting my new beliefs. Some accused me of having abandoned my faith. Others feared that I had been deceived by evil forces. These reactions saddened me, but I understood them. After all, I myself would have reacted in a similar way before my experiences. Despite these challenges, my new understanding of spirituality brought a peace and joy that I had never known before. I felt more connected not just to the divine, but to all people and nature. My fear of death has diminished significantly, replaced by a deep acceptance of the natural flow of existence. Today, I see my spiritual journey as an ongoing process of discovery and growth. I don't have all the answers, and I don't intend to have them, but I have a deep certainty that there is more to existence than our eyes can see or our minds can comprehend, and it is this certainty that gives me strength to face life's challenges and share my story with others. The physical recovery process after my accident was, without a doubt, the most difficult challenge I have ever faced in my life. The damage to my body was extensive, and for many months the pain was a constant and unrelenting companion. There were days when the simple act of breathing seemed like a Herculean task, and the thought of one day walking again seemed like a distant and unattainable dream. The doctors did the best they could, but even they couldn't hide their surprise at the fact that I had survived the accident. The surgeries followed one after the other, each one aimed at repairing a different part of my broken body. Physiotherapy was a daily routine of pain and frustration, where every small progress was achieved with immense effort. There were moments of deep despair during this period. The physical pain was overwhelming, but the emotional and psychological suffering was equally intense. I wondered if I would ever be able to lead a normal life again, if I would walk again, work, enjoy the simple things I previously took for granted. It was during one of these moments of discouragement that something extraordinary happened. It was a Sunday afternoon, and I was in my hospital room, deep in dark thoughts. A nurse entered, accompanied by a man who introduced himself as the hospital chaplain. He asked if I would like to be prayed for, and although I was skeptical at the time, I accepted out of politeness. The chaplain began to pray in a low voice, his gentle words filling the room. Suddenly, I felt something that I can only describe as a wave of intense heat running through my body. It started at the base of my spine and spread quickly, enveloping every inch of my being. It was a feeling that was both strange and deeply comforting. As this was happening, I had a vivid vision. I saw my body enveloped in a brilliant golden light. This light seemed to penetrate every cell, repairing, healing, restoring. I could somehow feel the bones realigning, the tissues regenerating, the vitality returning to my worn-out body. When the feeling passed and I opened my eyes, I noticed something incredible. The pain that had been my constant companion for the last few months was completely gone. Not only that, but I felt refreshed in a way I hadn't experienced since before the accident. Struck by sudden inspiration, I did something that would have been unthinkable just moments before. I sat up in bed without help. The chaplain and nurse looked at me in amazement, unable to believe what they were seeing. I couldn't believe it myself. In the days that followed, the doctors were perplexed by my sudden and inexplicable improvement. Exams showed that many of the injuries that had previously appeared permanent had healed in ways that defied medical explanation. My recovery, which had previously been predicted to take years, suddenly seemed possible in a matter of months. This event was a turning point not only in my physical recovery, but also in my spiritual journey. It was tangible, undeniable proof that there were forces beyond our understanding working on our behalf. It was confirmation that healing, whether physical, emotional, or spiritual, can come in ways that defy our logic and expectations. Experiencing this healing miracle strengthened my faith in a way that no sermon or sacred text ever could. It was no longer a question of believing in something abstract and distant, but of having directly experienced the touch of the divine. At the same time, this experience brought with it a deep sense of humility and gratitude. I wondered why I'd been blessed with this miraculous healing when so many others continued to suffer. I had no answers, just a growing awareness of the complexity and mystery of life. From that moment on, my recovery gained new momentum. Each day brought new progress, and I faced the remaining challenges with renewed determination. More than that, I felt a calling to share my experience with others. to offer hope to those facing their own battles with illness or adversity. This miracle of healing became a living testimony to the power of faith, prayer, and divine intervention. But more than that, it has become a constant reminder that there is more to life and healing than we can see or understand. It was the catalyst that transformed my recovery from a struggle with adversity into a journey of spiritual discovery and personal growth. Today, as I share my story with you, I feel a mixture of gratitude for the journey I've been on and a sense of urgency for what's to come. The experiences I had, the near-fatal accident, the visions of the afterlife, the miracle of healing, were not just for my personal benefit. I firmly believe that I was chosen to be a messenger, to share not only my story, but also a crucial warning for the times ahead. My main message is one of hope. I want everyone to know that no matter how difficult the circumstances, there is always a light at the end of the tunnel. My own journey is a testament to this. I was on the brink of death, broken beyond repair, and yet, here I am, not only alive but transformed in ways I could never have imagined. Suffering, no matter how painful, often serves as a catalyst for spiritual growth. Through my experience, I have learned that it is in the darkest moments that we have the opportunity to find our true inner strength and our connection to something greater than ourselves. However, along with this message of hope, I must also share a serious warning. The visions I saw during my near-death experience and subsequent revelations showed me that we are on the brink of a period of great change and challenge. The end of October this year marks the beginning of a series of events that will test humanity like never before. Natural disasters of unprecedented scale are about to occur. Earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, tsunamis. The Earth itself appears to be entering a period of upheaval and transformation. These events should not be seen as punishments or the end of the world, but as part of a larger process of planetary transformation. It is as if our planet is going through its own birth pangs, preparing for a new stage of existence. My warning is not to cause panic, but to encourage preparation, not just physical, but especially spiritual. The challenges we face will require more than just material resources. They will require an inner strength, a spiritual resilience that many of us have yet to develop. It is crucial that we begin to strengthen our connections with each other and the natural world around us. The structures and systems we have relied on for so long can be shaken, and it will be our ability to work together, to care for each other, that will allow us to overcome what is to come. I encourage everyone who hears this message to look within themselves, to seek their own connection with the divine. No matter what your religious or spiritual tradition, the important thing is to cultivate an authentic and personal faith, one that can sustain you in times of trial. At the same time, I ask that you be aware of the signs around you. Nature is constantly sending us messages, and we need to relearn how to listen to them. Practice compassion, not just towards other human beings, but towards all forms of life. For in the interconnectedness of all things lies our greatest strength and our best hope for the future. I know this message may seem alarming, perhaps even unbelievable to some. I understand the skepticism. I would have doubted all this myself before my experiences. But I ask that you keep your minds and hearts open. What is to come will require us to expand our understanding of what is possible, of what is real. Remember, the darkness we will face is not the end, but a prelude to a new dawn. Through these challenges, we have the opportunity to evolve not only as individuals, but as a species. We can emerge from this period of tribulation with a new understanding of our place in the universe, with a new appreciation for life in all its forms. My personal journey, from despair to hope, from pain to healing, from ignorance to enlightenment, is a microcosm of what all of humanity is about to experience. And just as I found strength and purpose through my trials, I have faith that we, as a global human family, can do the same. So, as we prepare for the challenges ahead, remember, you are stronger than you know. The divine light I have experienced during my journey is not unique to me. It resides within each of you, waiting to be awakened. Keep faith, cultivate compassion, strengthen your bonds with each other and with the natural world. And most of all, remember that no matter how dark the night seems, dawn will always come. We stand on the threshold of a new era, and together, we can face whatever the future holds. If you liked this beautiful spiritual testimony, leave a like, comment on your impressions, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to activate the notification bell to watch each new video and help us spread this message to a greater number of people. Until next time.